The 10,145th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, the safety and protection of waterways in the maritime domain. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with the Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedures, I invite the representatives of Argentina, Australia, Austria, Brazil, Bulgaria, Cambodia, Canada, Chile, Croatia, Cuba, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Djibouti, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Egypt, Estonia, Fiji, Finland, Germany, India, Indonesia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Jordan, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Lithuania, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Mauritania, Mexico, Montenegro, Morocco, Namibia, New Zealand, Nigeria, Paraguay, the Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, the Republic of Korea, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Seychelles, Singapore, Slovakia, South Africa, Spain, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Turkey, Ukraine, the United Arab Emirates, Vietnam, and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Arsenio Dominicos, Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, and Mr. Nick Childs, Senior Fellow, Naval Forces and Maritime Security at International Institute for Strategic Studies. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following to participate in this meeting. His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, and His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Fathi Ahmed Idris, Permanent Observer of the African Union to the United Nations. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2026/346, a letter dated 20th of April 2026 from the Permanent Representative of Bahrain to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President, Your Excellency Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Excellencies, I thank the Presidency of Bahrain for convening this open debate at a moment when the safety of the world's waterways has become a test of the international order itself. For centuries, maritime routes have been the arteries of global trade. carrying goods, energy, and ideas across continents, connecting societies, economies, and cultures. Today, those arteries are under strain. Piracy, armed robbery at sea, and acts of terror against shipping and critical marine infrastructure continue to threaten international peace and security. Geopolitical tensions are spilling into the waters. Merchant shipping is being used as a tool of pressure. And navigation rights and freedoms, bedrock principles of the law of the sea, are being undermined. Mr. President, no country can address these challenges alone. Maritime security threats touch every port, every coastline, every country, even landlocked ones. They demand collective responses. Yet war and deepening divisions are shaking the collective security system. Trust is eroding. International law is being violated in plain sight, and the institutions built to keep peace are being tested at their core. Mr. President, since early March, the disruption of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has struck at global energy security, food supplies, and trade. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. It carries roughly 1/5 of global oil trade, 1/5 of global liquefied natural gas, and nearly 1/3 of internationally traded fertilizers. Safe, unimpeded passage is an economic and humanitarian imperative. The economic shock has been immediate, and everyone is paying the price. Acute volatility in energy and commodity markets, surging transport and insurance costs, and the worst supply chain disruption since COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. These pressures are cascading into empty fuel tanks, empty shelves, and empty plates. The humanitarian toll is mounting. Delays and rising costs are slowing life-saving deliveries to people who cannot wait. And this crisis coincides with critical planting seasons. Prolonged disruption risks triggering a global food emergency, pushing millions, especially in Africa and South Asia, into hunger and poverty. The burden falls heaviest on least developed countries and small island developing states, nations most dependent on maritime imports and least able to absorb a shock they did nothing to cause. Mr. President, behind the cargo figures and the price surges are people. More than 20,000 seafarers remain stranded at sea. Over 2,000 commercial vessels are caught in a web of risk and restrictions to navigation. These men and women are not parties to any conflict. They are civilian workers keeping the world supplied. Their safety, their well-being, and their rights must be protected at all times and in all waters. I urge Member States to support the emergency evacuation framework prepared by the International Maritime Organization, a coordinated plan to ensure the safe movement, assistance and protection of effective crews in full accordance with international law. Mr. President, the Charter's prohibition of the threat or use of force applies fully at sea. Navigational rights and freedoms through the Strait of Hormuz must be respected, as affirmed by this Council's Resolution 2817. These principles must be upheld in full and without delay. I appeal to the parties: open the strait, let ships pass, no tolls, no discrimination, let trade resume, let the global economy breathe. Mr. President, this moment calls for restraint, dialogue and confidence building. The way forward is through peaceful settlement, drawing on Articles 33 and 34 of Chapter 6 of the UN Charter. My good offices remain available to support Member States in finding common ground. My special representatives and envoys are working closely with national and regional partners to help resolve disputes. The Black Sea Initiative showed that even amid conflict, practical cooperation can reopen a blocked corridor and keep ships and essential products moving. The United Nations can help develop a similar effort based on consent by convening, coordinating, and implementing arrangements between parties. It is possible where there is political will. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, moments of crisis are moments of choice. Last year, at this Council's open debate on maritime security, I called for action around 3 pillars. The current crisis makes them more urgent than ever. First, respect for international law. The Charter and the law of the sea are only as strong as member states' commitment to uphold them. At sea, as on land, the force of law must always prevail over the law of force. Second, addressing root causes. Investing in coastal livelihoods, governance, capacity building, and ocean health. Insecurity at sea begins on land. Third, deepening dialogue and cooperation among states, regional organizations, the shipping industry, insurers, port operators, and civil society, to enhance maritime domain awareness, to protect seafarers and other maritime workers, and to keep international waterways open, lawful, and secure. The ocean must be a zone of peace and cooperation, not confrontation or coercion. This is our moment to choose and act. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Arsenio Dominicals.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the United Nations Security Council. Since the 1980s, IMO has been addressing maritime security in the shipping and port sector and has in place the relevant mandatory standards to enhance global maritime security. Our regulatory process is constantly evolving to adapt to any new threats and make use of our experience and expertise. The geopolitical conflict around the Strait of Hormuz is having a very negative effect on seafarers and shipping and on the global population and economy. Approximately 20,000 innocent seafarers and nearly 2,000 vessels remained trapped in the Persian Gulf. Any disruption to shipping represents a global interference to energy and food security. The principle of freedom of navigation is not negotiable. Ships must be allowed to trade worldwide unhindered and in accordance to international law. In accordance with the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea and customary international law, straits used for international navigation cannot be closed by bordering states. Equally, there is no legal basis for any country to introduce payments or impose tolls, fees, or any discriminatory conditions on international straits. Any deviation from these well-established and recognized principles will set a negative precedent and severely undermine the integrity and stability of shipping operations worldwide. Since 1968, the International Maritime Organization has established a traffic separation scheme or maritime corridor in the Strait of Hormuz. This maritime corridor, jointly operated between Oman and Iran, has ensured safe navigation for decades. This is a mandatory mechanism in accordance with the IMO's International Convention on the Safety of Life at Sea, and both countries are signatories to this convention, which has governed the safety of ships at sea since 1974. Our main concern remains the safety and the well-being of the innocent seafarers trapped in the Gulf due to the conflict. Following the IMO Council decision, I have begun the development of an evacuation framework using the existing traffic separation scheme to securely evacuate ships and seafarers from the conflict zone, provided it is safe to do so. The technical and operational developments are being carried out with the involvement of the regional countries, including Iran, and with the support from relevant countries assisting in the negotiations. As an organization, we are ready to implement this framework without delay, but only once it is safe to do so. In this respect, I call upon states to uphold the principle of freedom of navigation and reject an imposition of tolls, fees, or discriminatory transit measures for the passage through a strait used for international navigation. I would like to take this opportunity to further request states to support the IMO's plan to facilitate the evacuation of affected seafarers at an appropriate time to assist with the clearance of any hazards to the commercial ships navigating in the Strait of Hormuz, including mines, provide any technical and operational civilian assistance to operationalize the evacuation framework, and to ensure practical assurances to the shipping sector, including access to insurance at reasonable costs, to enable the resumption of normal operations as soon as practicably possible. I would like to reiterate my appreciation for the support provided by the countries in the region in delivering essential supplies to seafarers in the Persian Gulf, safeguarding the well-being, and request them to facilitate crew changes when safe and possible. Shipping and seafarers should never be used as leverage in geopolitical conflicts. I would like to join and reiterate the call for de-escalation to ensure safety for seafarers, freedom of navigation, and stability of supply chains worldwide. Thank you for the opportunity.
I thank Mr. Dominicos for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Nick Childs.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished ministers, excellencies, members of the Security Council. A particular thanks to the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this high-level open debate and for inviting me to address it. Mr. President, the importance of maritime trade to the global economy is nothing new. Likewise, threats to the maritime ecosystem have also been with us down the ages. However, recent events have driven home in the starkest fashion that our critical dependencies on the maritime arteries of global trade have never been greater, and that the threats to the free use of the seas are becoming more complex and challenging. They have been an abrupt reminder that more than 80% of all global trade by volume is transported by sea. The fact that the world trading fleet has doubled in size in the last 2 decades is one measure of how our reliance on global trade has mushroomed. And events in and around the Strait of Hormuz in recent weeks have underscored how disruption to the world's key waterways can produce global economic fallout which affects billions of our citizens and leaves no regions or member states untouched. Moreover, we live in a suddenly more dangerous and unstable era in which it is not just the case that tensions and conflicts on land are spilling over into the maritime domain. It is one in which threats to global peace and stability, and therefore global economic well-being and prosperity, are increasingly manifesting themselves at sea. The reawakening of the global consciousness to the criticality, but also the fragility of the maritime domain and its ecosystem has been a double-edged sword. It has also shone a spotlight on some of the deficits in the international community's ability and capacity to respond. Above all, it has pointed to the need for a new approach, not just to the sharing of information, but also to the development of a shared strategic analysis of the character and implications of the challenges. The Council has focused increased attention on the risks to maritime security. It has adopted resolutions on the recent disruptions in and around the Red Sea and the current crisis in the Strait of Hormuz and its adjacent waterways. The international community has responded to the various threats posed to international shipping in recent years, but those responses have been suboptimal. Multiple maritime security agencies and maritime stakeholders, including in the industry and commercial sphere, have developed cooperative frameworks and practices over years and decades to cope with certain levels of threat. But the increased scale and growing complexity of the current threats have revealed that there remains something of a gulf in understanding among the widening array of interested parties and stakeholders over what can and what needs to be done, and this has been playing out in the latest events. There is a glaring requirement for a more integrated conversation and in-depth engagement over the realistic potential, but also the limitations of cooperative military means, in what frameworks and under what auspices, for delivering the safety and protection of waterways. What are the real dynamics that the maritime industry needs for reassurance in different situations? And what is the place for political and diplomatic engagement? The Black Sea Grain Initiative has already been mentioned, perhaps in conjunction with collaborative protective measures in some form or regional capacity building. These are surely important building blocks for future crisis prevention and management. All this has only been amplified and added urgency to the calls that this Council has heard for a more strategic, comprehensive and integrated approach to the more acute threats that are unfolding. Mr. President, if I may, I will outline 3 ways in which the evolving scale and complexity of the threats to critical waterways and good order at sea have raised the bar for those seeking to safeguard those waterways. First, there is the added complexity of the maritime economy itself. This includes the increasingly patchwork character of international shipping, which has been testing the limits of international regulation. Complicating matters still further, this is not just about shipping, sea lanes and maritime choke points. There is a new awareness of the connectivity of and dependency on critical maritime infrastructure, and especially critical undersea infrastructure, in the shape of communications cables and pipelines. Beyond cables and pipelines, it is about the protection of fixed infrastructure and wider resources. Beyond ports, it is about offshore energy installations and the migration of more economic activity out to sea, not just fishing, but including seabed resources, and how more broadly to protect the maritime environment. These fixed elements of the maritime economy require their own safeguards, distinct from those of protecting shipping and shipping lanes. In some cases, they involve stakeholders that have not traditionally been concerned with maritime domains. Secondly, complexity of the threats to both security and safety at sea have grown markedly beyond those traditionally employed by organised criminality. An array of potent sea denial capabilities of varying degrees of sophistication, but including missiles and various types of uncrewed vehicles, is proliferating among an expanding array of actors. This is presenting a new set of asymmetric threats and imposing increasing costs and risks on those seeking to keep waterways open. In terms of other emerging threats, the risks posed by cyber vulnerabilities are clearly on the rise for a maritime ecosystem driving inexorably towards greater automation. The weaponization of maritime data in ways that were never originally intended, through manipulation and spoofing, and even for target selection, is another concern. Paradoxically, the leveraging of data, supported by AI-enabled analysis and perhaps also aided by increased satellite-based monitoring, may be a key asymmetric advantage in delivering the kind of strategic approach required and providing early warning of emerging threats. In this way, it will be critical to safeguarding future maritime security and global security more broadly. And in this sense, the challenge is one that now stretches from the seabed to space. Thirdly, recent events have underscored the criticality of waterways and choke points to global stability and the global economy. They have also highlighted that choke points are not all the same. A strategic approach to maritime security must be founded on universal norms, but it must also be informed by a critical understanding of particular circumstances in order to deliver effective policy. The events in and around the Strait of Hormuz may be the most acute current concern as regards maritime security, but there are plenty of other potential regional maritime hotspots that will pose their own particular challenges, and these may only grow in number and volatility as the maritime environment continues to evolve. In conclusion, Mr. President, all of these factors appear to reinforce the proposition that maritime security requires a more holistic and sustained approach, but one that builds on existing frameworks and past experience with a more rigorous and robust treatment. The breadth of the challenges to safeguarding the global waterways and the maritime economy is only growing. Given that, the Council can provide the consistent forum for further comprehensive consultation on the context that threats to waterways and maritime security represent, and that they are no longer just a symptom of growing global instability, but also increasingly becoming a driver of it. I thank the Council for its attention.
I thank Mr. Charles for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I extend my sincere appreciation to His Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency, the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, and the Senior Fellow for Naval Affairs and Maritime Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, for their valuable insights and briefings, which have underlined the critical importance of the topic under discussion today. Today's open debate of the Security Council, with the valued participation of over 80 countries, comes at a pivotal moment and difficult global circumstances, given current international challenges and the direct and escalating threats to maritime security. These threats are characterized by deliberate actions aimed at obstructing freedom of navigation through international waterways, thereby endangering the global economy, international trade, and international peace and security. More than 90,000 vessels sail daily across oceans and seas, facilitating global trade valued in the trillions of dollars. The current situation, therefore, requires a collective response from the international community. The need for maritime security has never been more urgent than today. I would also like to express my appreciation to the countries that have joined today's statement on maritime security. I call on other states to join the statement, which condemns Iran's aggression against the Gulf Cooperation Council states and Jordan, and rejects Iran's actions in closing the Strait of Hormuz and exploiting the strait as a political tool and an economic resource by imposing fees on a natural international waterway. The freedom of navigation is a cornerstone of international law and peace. As such, it requires full compliance with and adherence to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which governs all maritime rights, as well as rights of transit and innocent passage through international straits. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz highlights the risks we face, with Iran's actions endangering the global economy and threatening the safety of millions, particularly those in the global south. These hostile acts, which some countries classify as terrorism, demonstrate the fragility of our critical trade routes with consequences extending beyond commercial interests to affect the livelihoods of countless individuals who depend on safe maritime corridors. Excellencies, any restriction or obstruction of international navigation directly affects international trade, energy security, and global economic stability, as well as food supply, medicine supply, and the delivery of humanitarian aid. The silence of the international community in the face of these unlawful practices leads to entrenching them, thus undermining the existing international framework and weakening confidence in the maritime system. This trajectory is detrimental to the interests of all nations. It threatens global supply chains and exacerbates the challenges faced by already fragile economies. In response to these pressing issues, it is vital to reaffirm the legitimacy of freedom of navigation, including the right of transit and innocent passage through international straits, while emphasizing the right of ships to navigate without discrimination, calling on all states to protect these rights and condemning any violations thereof. It is therefore necessary to take practical institutional measures to strengthen globally applicable maritime rules based on Security Council Resolution 552 of 1984, Security Council Resolution 2817, and Human Rights Council Resolution 61/1, as well as the Presidential Statement of the Security Council issued on the 2nd of this month, all of which have emphasized the importance of safety of international navigation. Today, more than 40 years after the adoption of Security Council Resolution 552, it is of the utmost importance to reaffirm this global guarantee of maritime security. Excellencies, maritime security is not the responsibility of a single state. It is rather a shared responsibility that requires genuine international commitment, sustained cooperation, and political will to ensure the free flow of international trade and the preservation of global stability. The security of international maritime corridors is a collective interest that cannot be addressed selectively. Accordingly, the Kingdom of Bahrain urges the international community to recognize the grave repercussions of Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This closure represents a violation of international law aimed at inflicting hardship on the peoples of the world and exploiting the situation in negotiations. This unlawful and irresponsible act has led to the detention of nearly 800 cargo ships in the Arabian Gulf and has stranded thousands of commercial vessels, leaving some 20,000 seafarers facing distressing conditions aboard vessels far from their countries and families. Therefore, distinguished guests, we ask the following questions. Does any country have the right, under any circumstances, to close a strait used for international navigation? What economic losses have your countries suffered as a result? How has the closure of the Strait of Hormuz affected the lives of your citizens? What measures can your countries take to resolve this crisis? Does navigation through international waters require the payment of transit fees, as Iran is seeking to do? Can your economies withstand the heavy losses they are currently incurring? We are fully aware that the economic impact on countries around the world could reach hundreds of billions of dollars, and that the world cannot afford further losses. We therefore call for an international response proportionate to the gravity of this act. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms that safeguarding maritime security is a shared and urgent responsibility that must not be overlooked. The international community must act collectively to prevent a dangerous downward spiral in which threats to maritime corridors become a common occurrence and violations are treated as normal, despite representing a breach of international law. Complacency and inaction in the face of such a situation will have grave consequences for international peace and security. Thank you.
I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jean-Noël Barrot, Minister of for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Minister, thank you. Thank you for having taken the initiative to convene today's meeting, which addresses a critical matter, the imprescriptible, inviolable right which is protected by the organization, namely maritime security and freedom of navigation. This question is all the more grave and salient today as the Strait of Hormuz has been subjected to prolonged blockade. But what are we speaking about here? What is taking place in Hormuz goes far beyond the 80 kilometers of that area. Beyond the immobilization of vessels, there's a certain idea of an international rules-based order which is at play here. Our ability, or rather our inability to act collectively for the global public good. 80% of global trade circulates through the sea. It's our energy, our foodstuffs, our commodities, our basic commodities. International waters are a common heritage of humanity, the use of which is protected under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Straits are the arteries of the world. They are not the property of any individual. They are not for sale. Therefore, they cannot be impeded by any obstacles nor blockages to passage, neither tolls nor bribery, neither by Iran nor by any other party, and under no pretexts. For what would take place if we were to accept the slightest exemption to this principle. Thereby, we would establish a dangerous precedent. Others would adopt similar initiatives, and the exception would become the rule. Access to the seas would be a privilege reserved for the few. Straits would become militarized corridors. Global trade would be taken hostage, and entire regions would become isolated. The world would be asphyxiated, subject to lawlessness and the law of the strongest, less prosperous, more dangerous. And this is a situation which we reject. And the overwhelming majority of us refuse to see impediments to freedom of navigation, undermining of law of the sea. How did we arrive at the situation, given that? This is the consequence of an accumulation of unilateral, illegal decisions taken by Iran. This is part of a military escalation whose origins lie in operations launched by the United States and Israel without a clearly set goal, which are conducted in a manner that flouts international law. However, the Iranian regime bears overwhelming responsibility in the situation due to its guilty obstinacy seeking to endow means means for destabilization and for threats through its nuclear program, through its ballistic missiles, through its consistent support for terrorist groups. By choosing to conduct a massive large-scale strikes against countries in the region, by allowing Hezbollah to engage in a war against its will, and by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian regime has been flouting the core principles of the Charter of the United Nations, as well as those of law of the sea, thereby exacerbating an already tenuous situation. There will be no lasting solution to this crisis unless the Iranian regime engages in major concessions and a radical change of posture to facilitate the peaceful coexistence of Iran with its regional environment and the Iranian people to be granted opportunity to build their own future. The Security Council cannot and must not turn a blind eye to the blood of the civilians in the region who are the main victims of this situation, the Iranian people who have been trapped in this situation and the resumption of hostilities after the resumption in January, the violent repression in modern-day history. Political prisoners must be released. Executions must be brought to an end. Freedom of communication must be restored. The war did not address these substantive problems. It has created more problems, namely with the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, where there are only losers here. Of course, coastal states, to whom I wish to reiterate France's solidarity, the most vulnerable states who depend on the basic necessities, commodities, and basic vital humanitarian assistance, which was being transported by the immobilized vessels, but also countries like mine, which beyond the seas are being targeted by feeling the shockwaves of the crisis, paying the price for a war we did not choose. And all of this has lasted for far too long. This must all be brought to an end. And I wish to take this opportunity to think of the crews who have been detained and to think of the critical work carried out by the IMO. Your work, Mr. Secretary General, in providing for their safety and security and establishing and implementing evacuation plans, will be critical to ending the crisis, and we fully support it. In light of the lawlessness and of this blockade of the strait, what can be done? Inaction is not an option, and I applaud the adoption of Resolution 2817 and the steps undertaken since then by Bahrain at the Security Council in order to arrive at the reopening of the strait. I recall the historic initiative adopted by the President of the Republic, launched in Paris on the 17th of April last, with the British Prime Minister, for maritime traffic to resume at the soonest, as soon as conditions permit, through an international, independent, strictly defensive mission. The purpose of this is to protect commercial vessels, to reassure maritime transport operators, and to conduct mine-clearing operations in the strait. More than 50 countries from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, non-belligerents, have heeded this call. Together, they have put forward 3 demands: the immediate, full, unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz by all the parties, the restoration of conditions for free passage, which were in place prior to the war, full respect for the law of the sea, and the absence of any restrictions, any regime of conventions that would be tantamount to an attempt to privatize the strait, and clearly any toll system. Oceans are a space for freedom, but not a space for lawlessness, and it is our shared responsibility to set the rules and to see to it that they are enforced. This is what we did in Nice last summer by hosting the 3rd United Nations Conference on the Oceans with the entry into force of the Treaty on the High Seas. The international community demonstrated that it can reach agreement to protect a common good, common heritage, and this success should be an inspiration for us. We are not condemned to see the breakdown of international law, the breakdown of IHL, or breakdown of law of the sea. Let us resist a resignation or discouragement which looms above us. Let us rise up to say no when peace and security, international peace and security, are at stake. This is the purpose of the Council. Let us be worthy of the trust placed in us by people and throughout the world, and let us rise to this moment. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Bavo for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Carlos Arturo Hoyos, Vice President for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Señor presidente,
Mr. President, Panama thanks the Presidency of Bahrain for organizing this important open debate to address a matter of the utmost relevance to international peace and security, a matter with which our country fully identifies. We are grateful for the valuable statements made by the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary-General of the International Maritime Organization, Mr. Antonio Dominguez, and by the Senior Fellow Naval Forces and Maritime Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Mr. Nick Childs. Likewise, we welcome here those countries who honor us with their participation today. Further, we recognize continued efforts spearheaded by Greece and Panama last year at their respective signature events focused on maritime security. The last few years have dramatically revealed the increasing fragility of maritime navigation in all regions of the world. In this increasingly complex environment, piracy and armed robbery at sea, cyber attacks on navigation systems, maritime ports and logistics, as well as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, all represent persistent threats that continue to affect maritime activity and seafarers, imperiling their security, safety, their working conditions, and in many cases their lives. This reality is worsened by a worrisome trend to obstruct the use of critical maritime routes in the context of various conflicts. Consequently, uncertainty in international trade has increased, affecting the predictability and security of global supply chains that, to a large extent, depend on maritime stability. In a deeply interconnected world, the disruption of critical maritime routes such as the Strait of Hormuz or the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea has immediate impacts on international trade and global energy security, with effects directly translating into economies and the daily lives of people in all countries, albeit disproportionately in the global south and in the most vulnerable economies. Maritime security should be understood as a global public good, the preservation of which demands collective responsibility. We reiterate our steadfast, unwavering position. No critical maritime route should ever be threatened or used as an instrument for pressure or coercion. In the light of these current challenges, Panama considers that it is a priority for this Council to promote de-escalation and the cessation of hostilities by all parties through dialogue and negotiated solutions. Furthermore, it is essential to strengthen respect for international law, in particular the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, including freedom of navigation and the right of safe transit passage through critical maritime routes. In addition, it is essential that technical, regulatory, or control-related measures used in the maritime domain be governed by objective, transparent, and non-discriminatory criteria in strict conformity with international law, and that such measures not be unfair or unfounded political reprisals. This includes respect for the sovereign decisions taken in relation to the management of strategic infrastructure, ports, and logistical and commercial activities. In this context, Panama observes with concern certain recent trends involving intensified inspections of vessels in a certain jurisdiction, including the significant increase of interdictions of ships flying the Panamanian flag. We concur with the Secretary-General. We believe, indeed, that these vessels should not be the subject of political pressure. Any diversion from these principles introduces uncertainty, undermines confidence, and generates additional risks to stability for global supply chains. We reiterate our support for the International Maritime Organization and its Director General, Arsenio Dominguez, and we acknowledge his work. We also reiterate our support for the decisions taken to address the impacts of the situation in the Strait of Hormuz on maritime transport and the well-being of seafarers in the context of its essential work to promote maritime security, protect the marine environment, and advance sustainable maritime transport. Mr. President, As the sovereign owner and responsible administrator of the Panama Canal, one of the most important maritime routes in the world, we fully recognize the challenges and risks affecting maritime security in the current context. Consequently, Panama has had to step up its efforts to guarantee and facilitate safe, continued, efficient transit by vessels, in particular those that depend on alternative routes such as ours. This responsibility compels us to insist on the need for collective and peaceful solutions based on dialogue, non-discrimination, and negotiation that ensure a safe, predictable, rules-based maritime environment. Mr. President, Panama condemns attacks recorded in the Strait of Hormuz on vessels flying the Panamanian flag, as well as those of Liberia and other flags. Since the beginning of March this year, several Panamanian flagged vessels have been the subject of actions affecting the safety of navigation. Among the vessels affected, there are two Panamanian flagged merchant ships, the Euphoria, that was attacked by 3 unidentified vessels without, fortunately, causing any damage to the ship or its crew, and MSC Francesca. This latter vessel was intercepted by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which ordered it to weigh anchor off the coast of Iran. Its crew is safe, although they remain detained unfairly. In light of this situation, Panama is following closely the events and coordinating the necessary steps to achieve a prompt resolution. Furthermore, we call on Iranian authorities to proceed to immediately release all detained vessels. These incidents highlight the increasing vulnerability of seafarers to the risks arising from geopolitical tensions. In this regard, Panama continues to firmly uphold multilateralism and continues to support joint coordinated efforts taking concrete, effective measures to restore order and preserve the integrity of the international legal order, thus avoiding creating precedents that would weaken respect for international law. Seas have always been spaces for encounter, exchange, and connection between peoples. Preserving their security is also preserving this spirit so that they remain arteries that bring our nations closer together rather than channels that deepen confrontation. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hoyos for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Andizes Willem Sans, State Secretary of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by thanking Bahrain for convening this open debate to address this critical issue of maritime security. I thank the Secretary General Guterres and also IMO Secretary General Dominguez and Mr. Childs for their pertinent briefings. Global waterways are the backbone of international commerce and global energy flows. Countries across the world depend on the supply of fertilizers, raw materials, and other products, from microchips to medicines that are essential to the functioning of our societies. International law and norms have sustained maritime infrastructure and enabled livelihoods, prosperity, and development. Yet, they are being increasingly challenged. We have experience of addressing certain threats in the maritime domain, usually regional in nature, whether piracy, smuggling, or organized crime, as well as environmental incidents such as oil spills. Now, we are increasingly facing a more direct challenge: deliberate actions from states intent on crippling the global economy and threatening the right of transit and innocent passage, alongside efforts to circumvent sanctions. Mr. President, the safety of critical maritime routes is essential. Any disruptions to this delicate system powering the global economy result in severe consequences for all of us, as seen with the Strait of Hormuz. With supply chains disrupted, global energy prices have been rising sharply, and acute food insecurity around the globe has grown at an alarming rate. Effects on agriculture will be long-term and cascading in nature. These harmful consequences will continue affecting the most vulnerable the hardest. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea sets the international legal framework, within which all activities in the sea are to be carried out in order to ensure lawful and safe maritime navigation. The global community must demonstrate resolve in addressing Iran's attempts to use an international waterway as a bargaining chip and to hold the global economy hostage. It is a dangerous and far-reaching precedent, which we cannot allow to normalize. The Council has been leading the way with Resolution 2817, but we must continue to address maritime security as a paramount issue of global stability. Increasing coordination at international fora like the IMO, as well as among coalition of states willing to contribute resources, ensuring free passage in international waterways is both timely and welcome. This moment calls for political resolve, strengthened multilateral cooperation, and a renewed commitment to safeguarding the rules-based maritime order. Mr. President, we also cannot ignore the deliberate campaign by malign state actors to use old and unsafe vessels to evade sanctions, so-called shadow fleet. The reckless use of these vessels, including for hybrid activities, is not just a striking violation of international law, but also creates de facto floating ecological time bombs, risking natural disasters wherever they go. When accidents strike, lack of proper documentation and insurance denies avenues for legal remedies. The Iranian regime and DPRK are prominent guilty parties, but Russia is the undisputed champion of threatening the world's marine ecosystems, just as it endangers the European mainland and airspace. Ongoing efforts demonstrate the evasion of lawful norms will not be tolerated. We must commend the IMO for its work to identify gaps and increase accountability. We also welcome the positive example of meaningful efforts undertaken by our Council colleagues Panama and Liberia, reforming their ship registries to purge these opaque vessels from their books. Coordination among countries is crucial, as is domain awareness, sharing of intelligence, and new reporting initiatives. Other emerging risks include those of subsea cable networks connecting the globe from communications to finance. While most damages still result from accidents and natural events, increasing attention must be paid to deliberate sabotage. The use of shadow fleet vessels for such unlawful actions further complicates attribution. International coordination is needed for monitoring. Relevant regulatory frameworks need to be reviewed, and partnerships with leading commercial actors would help increase the diversification and redundancy of subsea networks, as well as expand industry capacity. Mr. President, finally, we should not forget about other threats still disrupting local economies, costing lives, and feeding the black market, from piracy to smuggling and trafficking. The Council has played a leading role in combating these threats and should continue to do so, as it broadens its scope on global maritime security. Latvia will remain a steadfast defender of maritime security and free and safe navigation, as maritime navigation remains the lifeblood of the global economy and stability. I welcome also the initiatives by France and United Kingdom, and we stand ready to contribute our share to these efforts. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Villalson for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stephen Doughty, Minister of State for Europe, North America and Overseas Territories in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom.
Well, shukran, Mr. President, Your Excellency, Minister Al-Zayani. Thank you to Bahrain for bringing us together and for your leadership in this Council. Secretary General, that leadership is more important than ever in face of the growing threats to maritime and indeed regional security, from the Black Sea, indeed to the Baltic, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, to the Strait of Hormuz, or indeed globally, as has been pointed out, from the Russian shadow fleet. With reckless attacks and actions putting security and prosperity at risk, we must step up efforts together to safeguard international waterways from disruption, to protect mariners who find themselves in dangerous waters, denied passage and put at risk, and stand up for all of those most affected, including some of the world's most vulnerable people, particularly when it comes to food security or supplies of critical products and medicines. The United Kingdom, with its long history as a seafaring nation, has long been committed to maritime security. And I say that also as a Member of Parliament for a diverse port city of Cardiff with a proud merchant marine tradition and heritage throughout history. I am particularly glad to join Bahrain and this Council in that effort today. The most pressing issue, of course, before us is the Strait of Hormuz, and this crisis is not just affecting international shipping, it is driving up costs and sending shockwaves throughout energy markets and supply chains far beyond the region, with impact for all of our citizens and our communities and their cost of living. So we must get the strait reopened fully and unconditionally. Freedom of navigation must be restored in line with international law. Shipping and seafarers must not be used as leverage, and there is no place for tolls or permissions in international straits. Freedom of navigation means navigation must be free. And throughout this crisis, the United Kingdom has been clear: Iran must not be able to hold the global economy hostage or indeed threaten regional and international security. And that is why we need renewed action to protect supply chains, uphold freedom of navigation and the primacy of UNCLOS. And we must also broaden collaboration with the International Maritime Organization, which of course the United Kingdom is proud to host. And that is exactly how the UK has been approaching these critical challenges. In early April, my colleague, the Foreign Secretary, convened more than 40 countries to coordinate action on the Strait of Hormuz. And on the 17th, she supported our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and President Macron in convening over 50 nations to work on getting the straits open and protecting vessels. And in recent days, she has engaged in meetings across multiple countries with a dozen foreign ministers. And yesterday, our Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Trump discussed the urgent need to get shipping moving again. So the UK will continue to play its part, and this Council has a vital role to play. And that is why, with 135 others, we welcomed Resolution 2817, led by the Bahrain and the GCC, condemning Iran's reckless and unacceptable attacks against regional neighbours and its disruption of international trade, energy security and the economies of all of us. And we are grateful for Bahrain's efforts to pass a further resolution, underscoring the importance of protecting navigational rights and freedoms. It is regrettable that Russia and China vetoed this resolution protecting Iran, and therefore the UK will continue to work with Bahrain, Council members and partners to uphold international law, defend freedom of navigation, protect innocent seafarers, and keep our international sea lanes open and secure, because global stability and security depend on us stepping up together, and we welcome this discussion. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Doughty for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellency, the Foreign Minister. I wish to congratulate the Kingdom of Bahrain for its successful presidency this month and for organizing today's high-level open debate. And your presence attests to the importance attached by the Kingdom of Bahrain to global maritime security, which is crucial for the twin objectives of international peace and security and development. And allow me to take this opportunity to express Pakistan's complete support and solidarity with all brotherly countries of the Gulf region and to their sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. I thank Secretary General Guterres for his insightful remarks. In particular, the emphasis that he has placed on respect for international law, dialogue and cooperation, and peaceful settlement of disputes. We also appreciate the briefing by Mr. Arsenio Dominguez, Secretary General of the IMO, and also to Mr. Nick Childs for his expert views on the subject. President, the global maritime spaces are a key geostrategic arena where the challenges of the 21st century intersect. They are the lifeline of global commerce, bellwether of Earth's environment, and home to a vast array of marine, biological, and mineral resources. Propelled by the onward march of economic globalization and rapid improvement in transportation and connectivity infrastructure, global commerce and trade are now more reliant on seaborne trade than ever before. Any disruptions to the routine traffic at sea gravely impact international trade with negative repercussions for global economy and breed volatility that imperils international peace and security. Closure of the Strait of Hormuz and its cascading effects on food and energy security and supply chain disruption is a case in point. And if this crisis persists, the first order impacts, that is the issues related to the procurement of oil and gas and essential commodities such as the fertilizers and their pricing trends will increasingly translate into second and third order impacts on inflation, on growth, current account and balance of payment issues. No doubt, developing countries will be the most affected. Most significantly, these developments have brought home the point that resilience of global governance, architecture, and strategic stability are now being tested by the safety and openness of maritime waterways. President, as a literal state of the Indian Ocean region with proximity to global maritime choke points and overwhelming reliance on seaborne trade, Pakistan is fully cognizant of the paramount importance of safety and protection of global waterways. Like many developing countries from the region and beyond, Pakistan is concerned and is directly impacted by the closure of Strait of Hormuz. It is particularly also with this realization that Pakistan, supported by our partners and brotherly countries, including China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt, and others, has spearheaded constructive diplomatic efforts for de-escalation and broader pursuit of stability between the United States and Iran. In its ongoing efforts to facilitate an enduring resolution of this crisis, Pakistan remains firm in its faith in diplomacy and dialogue and will continue to resolutely undertake all possible measures towards that end. President, in today's interconnected world, the imperative of safety of maritime spaces extends well beyond securing trade routes and combating piracy. It encompasses a plethora of challenges, including climate change and environmental preservation, protection of critical coastal and underwater digital infrastructure, and safeguarding human rights at sea. Confronting these challenges necessitates collective and coordinated action, firmly anchored in international law, as well as dialogue and diplomacy. Since its adoption, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea has served as one of the most important pillars of international maritime order. The legal order established by UNCLOS and the larger body of the law of the sea must be protected and promoted universally. Pakistan has also remained a committed and responsible partner in the international efforts to strengthen maritime security. Earlier this year, Pakistan assumed the command of Combined Task Force 150 for conducting maritime security operations outside the Arabian Gulf to protect commercial shipping. And last year, Pakistan also commanded CTF 151, tasked to suppress piracy and to ensure free flow of maritime trade. We have also launched our own regional maritime security patrols to ensure a safe and secure environment in the seas. President, the global governance order is coming under increasing strain with wide-ranging consequences. Even international waterways have not been able to escape these impacts. The rules and norms that we had collectively and painstakingly put in place to precisely avoid such contestations and confrontations are being challenged or put aside. This is an untenable situation whose prolongation would only further undermine international peace and security and sustainable development to the detriment of us all. And most consequentially, it will erode trust in the rules-based order. As a maritime state with unwavering faith in international law and diplomacy, Pakistan would continue to engage with the Secretary General, the Security Council, and with all like-minded countries for preserving the hard-won gains, both in the gentle tides of peace and amity and amid the rising storms of conflict and conflagration. This is a sacred trust that history has placed upon us all, and we cannot afford to fail. We must succeed collectively. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Al-Ziani, for convening today's critical debate. Thank you, Secretary General, IMO Secretary General Dominguez. Thank you, Mr. Childs, for your briefings. Colleagues, the world's critical waterways are not bargaining chips that belong to any one country. And now, maritime transit routes, which are truly the arteries of global commerce, that roughly 80% of global trade by volume moves through such waterways, they are too vital, they're too important to all of us collectively as a global community to be choked off, to be mined, to be weaponized, to be attacked like two-bit pirates. Because when they are, the entire world pays the price, and the world is paying. Most countries, far more than the United States, they are paying for Iran's hostage-taking gambit in the Strait of Hormuz. So let's take a moment and look at the numbers. The Strait of Hormuz typically sees 20 million barrels of oil per day, 40,000 vessels per year, and whether they're bound to heat homes in East Asia or to nourish crops in Central Africa, they have 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas, 15% of the world's fertilizers. They all transit this strait. And closer to home, it's responsible for 75% of our Gulf states' partners' economic output and over 50% of the broader region's food. It is absolutely clear, it's unambiguous, that as a matter of international law, this strait is not, despite Iran's foreign minister's claims, this strait is not Iran's to wield like its own moat and drawbridge. It is not Iran's hostage. It is not Iran's bargaining chip. It is not Iran's toll road. And that's what over 100 countries right outside this doors just testified in one of the most supported press conferences in recent years. 100 countries just said what I said. This is not for Iran to play with like some type of bargaining chip because of its illegal nuclear aspirations. Colleagues, less than 3 weeks ago, the world came together to counter this threat to maritime security. The Security Council adopted UN Security Council Resolution 2817 with a record-setting 136 co-sponsors, demanding that Iran cease its egregious attacks against its neighboring states. Regardless of what you feel about the ongoing conflict, it has chosen to shoot in all directions against its neighbors' civilian infrastructures. And the entire world condemned the obstruction of freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has done nothing but act in defiance of that resolution. 40 days and counting, they have laid sea mines, they have fired on civilian ships. We have worked to clear the sea mines and protect these ships, but it's used the strait also to launch thousands of missiles at Gulf capitals, their hospitals, their airports, their hotels, their neighborhoods. They have threatened to charge tolls, otherwise known as bribes, to allow ships to pass through the strait. And in true form, they have still tried to kill even more Americans than they have in the last 47 years. And this is why President Trump has directed firm action against Iran's threats in the maritime domain to safeguard the entire world's economic security and prosperity. And even while under this type of assault, this type of fire, thousands of drones and missiles pouring in, Bahrain and a coalition of Gulf states put forward another resolution to protect the freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Straits of Hormuz. But unfortunately, two countries, China and Russia, vetoed this resolution and chose a radical religious regime for its partner and ignored not only the plight of our Gulf countries, but the global economy. They chose to shield the Iranian regime from a common sense measure, and they chose to turn a blind eye against Iran's assault on the freedom of navigation, which is hard to make sense of given it's the economies of East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Africa that are most affected by this illegal assault on shipping. So unfortunately, these two countries have put their own economic interest ahead of international obligations. Their companies and citizens supported the Iran-backed Houthis, in addition, in waging a 2-year campaign of terror against shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, which before this crisis was one of the most disruptive assaults on maritime commerce in recent history. Ultimately, colleagues, this Council must hold the Iranian regime to account for this blatant and occurring violation of international law, violations of the UN Charter, violations of binding Security Council sanctions, and violations of other measures that were snapped back into place in September. Violations of its own non-proliferation obligations, as we just had a non-proliferation gathering here in the General Assembly. Violations of its obligations under the law of the sea. Violations of the law of war. Violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. But I want to particularly spend a moment on the sea mining and indiscriminate planting of mines in international waterways. That makes Iran the international criminal, pirates of the Straits. Tehran admits to these crimes, but is so incompetent, it also admits to not knowing where the mines are. Thankfully, the U.S. military is stepping in to clear these mines and make it safe. But colleagues, we need to broaden this effort. Now is the time for a coalition of like-minded partners to step up and step in with real capabilities and help. We need for commercial shipping, for maritime finance and insurance, for humanitarian aid agencies, over 80 of which move their humanitarian supplies through this strait for life-saving aid, in addition to the military assets, to come together in a coalition for maritime freedom. As the permanent representative of Pakistan just mentioned, we've come together before. We came together in CTF 151 to deal with piracy off the straits, or off East Africa in the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb. The United Nations was built for times like this. We have been here before. We have allowed unchecked regimes and non-state actors to loudly tiptoe towards horrors against their neighbors, while much of the rest of the world sat back and watched. Colleagues, now is not the time for simple words. Now is the time to act. And we call upon the world to join us in maintaining and defending the freedom of navigation for the entire world's economy. I thank you, Mr.
I
President.
thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. A few days ago, on 22nd April, a Liberian flagship was seized by Iran, causing damage to the vessel. And so today, we speak with the clarity of an affected nation. At the onset, we join in thanking the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this debate at a moment when the map of global insecurity is being increasingly drawn at sea. What happens in narrow straits is now felt in distant markets, in fragile economies, and at distant kitchen tables from the south to the north and from the east to the west. I welcome the honored presence of His Excellency Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain and President of the Council. His Excellency, the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, His Excellency, the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama, His Excellency, the State Secretary of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Latvia, and His Excellency, the Minister of State of the United Kingdom. I also thank our distinguished briefers, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, and a senior fellow of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. I thank all of you for your invaluable insights. Mr. President, the world does not experience maritime insecurity as a naval skimmage or a distant headline. It experiences it as empty shelves, higher fuel prices, delayed humanitarian aid, and uncertainty in daily life. As we have heard, when shipping lanes are disrupted, global stability does not bend slowly. It fractures immediately. The rise in threats to international waterways reflects a dangerous erosion of long-established norms. navigational rights and freedoms are being openly challenged. Attacks on merchant vessels are increasing, and seafarers face growing risks along critical maritime routes. Even where states invoke the inherent right of self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter, the duties and obligations governing maritime security remain unassailable. Civilian shipping is not a lawful target. Freedom of navigation cannot be suspended by convenience, and international law does not yield to expediency. Let me be direct. Today's maritime choke points are no longer just passages. They are pressure valves on the global economy. When they are squeezed, the world feels it. The innocents, men, women, children, babies, suffer. In the here and now, the growing interference with commercial shipping is not incidental. It is strategic. We are witnessing the creeping normalization of disruption as leverage. That is dangerous. Because once obstruction becomes a tactic, stability becomes negotiable. And when stability is negotiable, the smallest economies, like that of my country, pay the highest price. Given the current threats, international law must remain our anchor. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is not a suggestion. It is the operating system of the oceans. Freedom of navigation, transit passage, and innocent passage are not privileges. They are rights, rights to which the entire world is entitled. And rights cannot be selectively respected without being collectively weakened. The same applies to the law of armed conflict at sea. Civilian vessels are not, must not, and cannot be targets. Seafarers are not collateral. These are not gray areas. Excellencies, we must confront the humanitarian dimension with greater honesty. Disruptions at sea do not stay at sea. They travel faster than any ship into food insecurity, into energy shocks, into delayed humanitarian relief. A blocked waterway, as we have heard, can mean an empty market thousands of miles away. That is the human cost of maritime insecurity. As such, Liberia offers 3 practical points. First, restraint must be restored. Attacks on commercial shipping and interference with lawful navigation must end. There is no strategic gain that justifies systemic disruption of global lifelines. Second, this Council must be consistent. Resolutions such as 2722 of 2024 and 2817 of 2026 are clear, but clarity is not enough. Credibility on even-handed implementation truly must be required, because selectivity erodes this Council's credibility and authority. Third, we should begin to treat major maritime choke points as shared responsibility zones, where transparency is not optional. We propose that the Council encourages the establishment of a standing independent incident tracking and verification mechanism, drawing on the expertise of the International Maritime Organization to provide real-time, depoliticized reporting on disruptions to commercial shipping. In an environment clouded by competing narratives, verified facts are a form of de-escalation. Mr. President, the oceans are to connect us rather than divide us. Adherence to the laws governing the oceans guarantee our global unity and reinforce our interdependence. The oceans have always connected supply to demand and risk to responsibility. If we allow them to become theaters of unchecked disruptions, we will inherit the consequences. All of us, a divided world rather than an interdependent one. Liberia will continue to stand for a simple principle that the world's waterways must remain open, governed by law, and protected not just because trade depends on it, but because humanity does. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Liberia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Mr. President, allow me to congratulate your country for convening this valuable debate on a matter of concern to us all. I would particularly like to thank the Secretary General and Secretary General Dominguez, as well as Mr. Childs, for their informative briefings. Colombia recognizes the strategic importance of straits for international trade and energy security. Any disruption to maritime security has impacts that are often felt beyond the region in which they occur, having a disproportionate effect on developing countries. Colombia is a nation with a maritime vocation, with coastlines on 2 oceans, and a clear commitment to the sustainable protection of natural resources. Given its geostrategic location, my country is vulnerable to myriad challenges in maritime security, including drugs trafficking at sea, illegal fishing, irregular migration, illicit arms trafficking, and the protection of our natural resources and marine ecosystems. In this regard, while Colombia is not a state party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, we recognize that it does regulate many human uses of the maritime domain, including in relation to freedom of navigation. However, unfortunately, UNCLOS does not provide all the answers to circumstances such as the recent closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Inter alia, because the Convention is designed to apply in times of peace, and when conflicts arise, it does not contain all of the necessary tools. In the face of these regulatory gaps, or in the face of violations to the existing legal framework, the Security Council must play the role for which it was established. The Council is in a position to send clear messages aimed at containment and at preventing greater escalation, and in a position to take measures to demand respect for the UN Charter and international law. That said, The Council's role is just one piece of the puzzle. Indeed, maritime security must be addressed from a perspective of cooperation among naval forces, civilian agencies, regional organizations, multilateral actors, and the private sector. The isolated action of one country, agency, or organization is insufficient to address the many and very complex challenges facing freedom of navigation. In addition, climate change and environmental degradation also have serious repercussions for maritime security, requiring urgent international action. Accordingly, Colombia advocates for the promotion of initiatives to strengthen international cooperation to address threats in the maritime domain. This includes strengthening respect for the law of the sea and further developing the naval capacities of developing countries and states in the naval capacities in and regional cooperation in Latin America and the Caribbean. In this regard, it is essential to train armed forces in maritime interdiction operations, to build their naval capacities, particularly for risk prevention, and to transfer necessary knowledge and technology to address emerging threats. Further, Colombia believes that it is necessary to have more bilateral and multilateral instruments to combat drugs trafficking at sea, address human trafficking, as well as protect the rights of migrants at sea and improve the protection of the marine environment. Mr. President, today's debate follows in the footsteps of recent efforts to include the Security Council in discussions on new United Nations mechanisms to enhance peace and security in the maritime domain. We welcome these efforts, and we support the UN playing a more prominent role in this area. A firm collective response to maritime threats is in all of our interests. It is a basic building block for peace and security, and essential to promoting economic prosperity, the rule of law, and sustainable development. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President, Minister Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani. Shukran, Your Excellency, for leading this important meeting today. Allow me also to express our appreciation to the Kingdom of Bahrain's presidents for convening this important and timely high-level open debate on the theme of a paramount importance to the maintenance of international peace and security. We welcome and thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his remarks. We also thank IMO Secretary General Antonio Dominguez and Mr. Nick Childs for their briefings. Their presence and contribution and insights highlight the multifaceted nature of the challenges at hand and underscores the profound urgency of addressing the evolving maritime security landscape through an enhanced collective response to ensure the safety and protection of international waterways. For Somalia, a nation with the longest coastline of Africa's mainland and situated in a crossroads of the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, the security and sustainable management of our maritime domain are not merely a policy priorities, they are matters of deep significance for the national and regional stability. The safety of international waterways is a cornerstone of international peace and security and a vital enabler of the global economy. Recent developments have brought renewed attention to the vulnerability of critical maritime checkpoints. These critical routes serve as the major transit paths for global energy flows and movement of goods, including bulk of commodities, agricultural shipments, and manufacturing materials that are essential to global supply of chains. In that regard, I would like to offer the following points. First, upholding international law remains fundamental and the bedrock of maritime governance. United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and other relevant instruments provide the definitive legal framework for maritime governance applicable to all activities in the oceans and seas, including the regulation of a passage through waterways used for international navigations. Somalia underscores the absolute necessity of reaffirming our commitment to this framework and upholding the freedom of navigation while respecting the navigational rights and freedoms of merchants and commercial vessels as emphasized in the recent Council resolutions. We must ensure our maritime domain remains governed by the rule of law with full respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of coastal states, which is essential for building trust and ensuring effective actions. Second, we believe effective maritime security requires coordinated, holistic approach to address the root causes. It's imperative to recognize that maritime security is inextricably linked to the sustainable development on land. Poverty, unemployment, and lack of opportunity often serve as significant drivers, pushing vulnerable populations toward the criminal and illicit activities at sea. Among these, illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing stands out as devastating transnational crime that depletes vital marine resources, degrades ocean ecosystems, and causes irreversible damage. Addressing these drivers through an African Union's Blue Economy Initiative and the 25th Integrated Maritime Strategy is vital for fostering the long-term stability to eliminate these drivers. Third, capacity building and technology transfers are paramount for effective enforcement. Efforts to address maritime threats are most effective when coastal states possess the necessary surveillance, law enforcement, and judicial capacities as they have primary responsibilities. Strengthening the international cooperation is essential to mitigate the impact of evolving threats, and we must build on existing national, regional, and international initiatives to enhance member states' capacity. Many African countries continue to require sustained, tailored support to strengthen their processes. We underscore the importance of tailored training, access to advanced technology, and investment in human and institutional resources as articulated in Lomé Charter. Furthermore, we emphasize the role of the African Union in developing regional maritime components to respond to emerging threats. Fourth, promoting maritime security requires coherent and effective multilateral approaches. Given the transnational nature of these challenges, no single state can address them in isolation. We must strengthen existing frameworks such as UN-Day architecture, which is essential for information sharing and joint operations. While the responsibility of maritime security rests first and foremost with littoral states, it must be supported by a robust international cooperation and partnership that respect the sovereignty and the leadership of those states in the region. Security Council plays a vital role in protecting the freedom of navigation, reinforcing global efforts, and pursuing an integrated and forward-looking approach to ensure the safety of critical maritime routes and free flows of trade, food, and connectivity. To conclude, Mr. President, Somalia is mindful of our shared responsibility for the security and stability of our oceans and seas. Addressing these challenges require a unified and collective approach grounded in international cooperation and the rule of law. My delegation reaffirms its commitment to working constructively with the Security Council and the wider international community to realize the vision of safe, secure, and prosperous seas for all, ensuring our waterways remain a bridge of peace and prosperity, connecting nations rather than dividing them. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, Mr. Minister, we have taken note of the decision of the Bahraini delegation to organize an open debate dedicated to the question of maritime security. We thank the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Arsenio Dominguez, as well as Nick Childs for their briefings. As is well known, the Russian Federation did not support the idea of discussion of maritime security at the UN Security Council insofar as this is being considered at length and in detail at the corresponding specialized fora. However, the overall situation with maritime security that has been unfolding recently in the world's oceans and seas not only constitutes a grave threat to global and international trade and is a factor in the outbreak of the global economic crisis, but this is also liable to trigger military escalation. The situation is such that threats of maritime security are now not necessarily emanating from pirates or other criminal elements. Rather, they are emanating from new 21st century flibustiers, countries of the European Union who have no qualms about seizing and interdicting commercial vessels in egregious breach of the 1982 UN Convention on Law of the Sea. This, in turn, is undermining energy and food security and is posing problems of a humanitarian nature for developing states. At the same time, unlike pirates who raised their black flags with a skull and crossbones on their vessels, Western countries are attempting to conceal their lawless actions with references to unilateral coercive measures. I wish to remind those champions of legal approaches in other contexts that according to the Charter of the UN, only sanctions imposed by the Security Council are legitimate. There is no understanding in international law of a shadow fleet. This is merely a fig leaf, the purpose of which is to conceal the fact that the EU is engaged in blatant robbery at sea. And once again, we are hearing about the rules-based order which Europeans once again are presenting as international practice. And we wish to remind you of something which is obvious. Under the law of the sea, coastal states cannot, under their discretion, detain another state's flagged vessel for inspection. Such steps, even in the territorial seas, are an egregious violation of the right of peaceful navigation, and in international waters, they constitute an encroachment on freedom of navigation. This is a bedrock norm of international customary law, which is enshrined in the UN Charter on the Law of the Sea. The inviolability of these norms, as well as the principle of exclusive flag state jurisdiction over their vessels, provides for the stable and predictable operations of the system of international maritime trade. And for this reason, the Convention contains a closed list of justifications for when states may detain vessels for inspections while they exercise the above-mentioned rights and freedoms. The operations of EU countries which trample upon the norms of the law of the sea can generate a domino effect, the consequence of which can be the complete halt to the system of global maritime trade. And at the same time, the engagement of NATO maritime forces for the detention of vessels leads directly to military escalation. Mr. President, Ukraine's armed attacks on Russian-flagged civilian vessels or vessels transporting Russian utilities in various parts of the world's oceans warrant particular attention. Such attacks constitute a direct threat to international peace and security, not to mention the fact that seafarers from various parts of the world, including European ones, are suffering as a result. Such attacks take place increasingly frequently in direct proximity to the coasts of countries who sympathize with the Zelensky regime, and a question arises about their complicity in such attacks. As a result, there is significant damage to the environment. Economic damage is afflicted upon coastal states, and trade communications between countries are being disrupted. Since November 2025 to April 2026, in the Black Sea and Mediterranean sea waters alone, there were 17 attacks targeting the commercial vessels of various countries' flagged vessels, including those flagged by the Russian Federation, Malta, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Gambia, and the Comoros Islands. An egregious instance of the breach of international law was seen in the terrorist attack on 3 March 2026 with crewless boats and drones of the Kiev regime targeting the Russian-flagged Arctic Medegas LNG tanker in the Mediterranean Sea. As a result, there was an explosion, and the vessel, with more than 100,000 cubic meters of LNG on board, was engulfed in flames. And now the tanker, which sustained significant damage, is drifting in the Mediterranean Sea. Given the nature of the cargo and the presence of bunker fuel, there is a risk of catastrophic consequences for the environment and the lives and health of people, as well as the coastal infrastructure of coastal states. And the coastal states themselves have been unwittingly involved in this incident. They have voiced profound concern in light of the threat of environmental damage. Yes, indeed, they were unable to summon the courage to provide a due assessment of the fact that there was an attack on a civilian vessel, which was perpetrated in direct proximity to their coasts. Another recent example was the marine drone attack on the Altura tanker on 26 March 2026, which was 15 nautical miles away from the Bosphorus Strait. The vessel was significantly damaged, which resulted in its taking on water and becoming disabled. At the moment of the attack, the tanker was transporting approximately 140,000 tons of crude oil. Just imagine the potential catastrophic consequences of the spill of such a large quantity of oil onto the shores of Turkey. We urge all states who respect the 1982 Convention and who wish to prevent escalation, call upon them to adopt a position in principle to condemn these attacks and to leverage all possible means in order to prevent this. Mr. President, one cannot but note that Western countries who are interdicting vessels in violation of international law and who are tacitly supporting Kiev's acts of terrorism have a completely different position when it comes to navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, lodging vociferous and baseless allegations against Iran for the situation that has unfolded. It amuses me to hear how these European Union foreign ministry heads, as well as the EU members who will speak later, how they shamefully sweep the root cause of the situation in the Strait of Hormuz under the rug. Well, how can they hurt the feelings of their suzerain and let the suzerain no longer cast those countries aside in that way? Let us recall that the situation in the Gulf of Hormuz is a consequence of the unprovoked U.S.-Israeli aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which not only caused the residents of the entire region to endure suffering on a colossal scale and precipitated the collapse of stability in the Persian Gulf zone, but also spawned large-scale consequences for the global economy, for energy, and for food security. The Persian Gulf states provide the global market with 1/5 of all oil, more than 1/3 of liquefied natural gas, providing significant volumes of ammonia, phosphates, and sulfur. When, as a result of the perfidious attack by Western Jerusalem and Washington, an entire region was engulfed in flames, there was an attempt to pin full responsibility on Iran as if it were Iran, which attacked its neighbors, and Iran, which is deliberately obstructing the navigation through the the Strait of Hormuz. And yet, in times of war, a coastal state that is under attack may limit navigation in its territorial waters for the purposes of security. Let us recall that before 28 February, before the decision of the United States and Israel to attack Iran, there were no serious disruptions to commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf whatsoever. Hence, a legitimate question arises, why did everything have to begin then? Why did they have to start everything then? And the response is on the surface here, including the desire to oust an inconvenient regime and to catch a fish in murky waters. And yet today we hear merely argumentation about imaginary threats. And the price for this misadventure will have to be paid by friendly capitals and the peoples of the countries of the Persian Gulf. The Russian Federation staunchly advocates for a ceasefire and restoration of a political diplomatic process in order to resolve existing conflict, in order to uphold the security of interests of all states in the region, barring none. We support the corresponding initiatives of our Pakistani friends. We trust that the parties will strictly adhere to the current truce and will provide an opportunity for diplomacy to work for a definitive agreement to be arrived at. We call for abandonment of hawkish rhetoric and hawkish plans for the rekindling of a greater regional war. Such a scenario will merely cause greater suffering for civilians and will further undermine stability and security in all regions, including in Israel, and will not help to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Monsieur le Président, la République.
Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo wishes to warmly welcome you, Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain. Your presence honors us and once again offers us an opportunity to congratulate your country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, upon its leadership in the conduct of the proceedings of the Security Council, as well as for the steadfastness in the approach of upholding the rights of civilians and promoting peace and upholding the rights of civilians affected by armed conflict. In the same vein, we welcome the presence of the ministers and vice ministers for foreign affairs during today's meeting. And lastly, we wish to thank Arseno Dominguez, Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, as well as Mr. Nick Childs, Senior Fellow, Naval Forces and Maritime Security, for their high-quality briefings. Mr. President, seas and oceans are common heritage of humankind, as well as a critical bedrock for the operations of the global economy. They provide for smooth international trade, they support supply chains, and they provide lasting links amongst nations. These strategic spaces today are facing convergent threats which are impeding freedom of navigation, are undermining economies, are disrupting energy and trade flows, and are compromising, more broadly speaking, international stability. And what is at stake here has now gone beyond maritime safety and security alone. What is at stake here is the ability of the international community to preserve an open, secure, global space that is governed by law. Illicit trafficking in migrants, piracy, transnational organized crime, and new threats targeting port infrastructures, navigation systems, and vessels continue to surface in many regions, specifically in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Guinea. These combined threats pose a grave threat to the security of coastal states, endanger civilian and crews' lives, while at the same time disrupting supply chain operations. Mr. President, for my delegation, these complex challenges can only be resolved through a holistic approach that is rooted in enhanced regional and international cooperation, prevention, innovation, and strict respect for the rule of law. And this approach needs to be part of lasting frameworks for maritime governance that can preempt and provide effective and efficient responses to the rapidly evolving threats. And it is a conceptual and practical shoring up of maritime security, which is inextricably linked to respect for international law, particularly the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, as well as the relevant instruments of the International Maritime Organization, which represents the normative bedrock guaranteeing freedom of navigation, safety and security at sea, and peaceful dispute resolution. Africa is cognizant of these challenges, and therefore we have embraced this approach at the regional and sub-regional levels. At the regional level, the African Union, on 15 October 2016, adopted the African Charter on Maritime Safety and Security and Development in Africa. This is a strategic framework, the purpose of which is to improve maritime safety and security, to fight against illicit activities, to promote the development of the blue economy by leveraging cooperation, coordination, and exchange of information among member states. Several years ago, on the 25th of June 2013, 25 states of the West African and Central African sub-regions, including the DRC, adopted the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, the purpose of which is to provide security in the Gulf of Guinea. This Code of Conduct has been recognized as having established a culture of unity as well as enhanced collaboration for the Gulf of Guinea, particularly when it comes to the security of vessels. We see headlines about threats to security of maritime routes and the principle of freedom of navigation, specifically when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, which is embroiled in tensions in the Middle East. This strait is a strategic corridor for global trade. As such, it carries deep significance for the delivery of essential goods and energy resources. The escalation of tensions in such a strategic area harbors significant risks to international and regional stability. In this context, the DRC believes that it is incumbent upon the Security Council to be fully seized of the matter and to contribute through its mandate to preventing any deterioration of this situation. The protection of civilians, of crews, and maritime infrastructure must remain a priority, strictly in accordance with international humanitarian law and in accordance with the applicable rules for armed conflict at sea, specifically the principles of distinction and proportionality. To that end, we encourage, inter alia, the mediation efforts underway, specifically those efforts which are being spearheaded by Pakistan. We call upon parties concerned to embrace dialogue, restraint, and de-escalation. Mr. President, in conclusion, the DRC wishes to reaffirm our commitment to working alongside the members of the Security Council to enhance maritime safety and security. And we propose 5 key levers that the Security Council can base its action on, namely, enhancement of cooperation coordination of international and regional efforts, integration of new emerging threats and technologies, more meaningful support for durable regional strategies, enhancement of prevention and resilience of coastal states, and lastly, promotion of inclusive and preventive maritime governance that is based on respect for international law. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Democratic Republic of the Congo for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I welcome His Excellency Foreign Minister Zayani of Bahrain presiding over this meeting, and I thank Secretary General Guterres, Secretary General Dominguez, and Mr. Childs for their briefings. Oceans are the cradle of life and connect the world, carrying more than 80% of global trade. They have become the main arteries for the functioning of economies and human society. To guarantee the safety and security of international shipping routes is crucial to the stability of global production and supply chains and to people's livelihoods and well-being, serving the common interests of all nations. In recent years, due to rising global turmoil, maritime security issues have heated up and have become increasingly intertwined with geopolitical conflicts, traditional and non-traditional security risks, and global governance deficits. Upholding the spirit of unity and cooperation, we need to view maritime security issues in a comprehensive and in-depth manner and seek solutions that address both symptoms and root causes. Let me stress the following points. First, we need to find political solutions to hotspot issues. The stability and smooth operation of international shipping routes are closely linked to peace and stability in the surrounding region, especially coastal states. Only through dialogue and consultation can we de-escalate hotspot issues and create an enabling environment for the safety of these routes. Excessive use of military means cannot fundamentally resolve risks. Rather, it will exacerbate tensions and confrontation and create even greater security crises. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital corridor for the international trade of goods and energy, and maintaining security, stability, and unimpeded passage in this region is in the common interest of the international community. The root cause of this blocked strait is the illegal military actions launched by the US and Israel against Iran. Despite the recently concluded ceasefire arrangement, the US has stepped up its military deployment and imposed targeted blockade. This is dangerous and irresponsible behavior. The solution to ending the blockade in this strait is to achieve a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire as soon as possible, so as to restore peace and stability in the Gulf region and the Middle East. China commends Pakistan and others for their role as mediators and urges relevant parties to resolve disputes and conflicts by political and diplomatic means. China opposes any moves that could undermine the ceasefire and lead to escalation and confrontation, guided by the spirit of the four-point plan for Middle East peace put forward by President Xi Jinping, namely upholding the principles of peaceful coexistence, national sovereignty, international rule of law, and a balanced approach to development and security. China will continue to play a constructive role in promoting regional peace and stability. Second, we must firmly uphold the international rule of law. UNCLOS, together with relevant international treaties and customary international law, collectively form the foundation of today's international maritime order. All countries should interpret and apply the Convention fully, accurately, and in good faith, and refrain from selective application and double standards. Everyone should exercise the rights to freedom of navigation granted by international law in good faith, earnestly respect the sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests of coastal states, and ensure the smooth flow of normal maritime trade and navigation. Third, we must combat maritime crime in accordance with the law. According to reports from relevant agencies, the world saw 137 incidents of piracy and armed robbery at sea last year, the highest in the past 5 years. Criminal groups and terrorist forces are increasingly using oceans as their key channels for illicit activities such as trafficking of drugs, arms, and humans. By observing the framework of international law, all countries should combat maritime crime in accordance with laws and regulations. while respecting the flag state's exclusive jurisdiction over its own vessels. At the same time, we need to actively support coastal states' economic development and improvement of lives, thereby eliminating the breeding ground of crime and turmoil. Fourth, we need to consistently improve global governance. Oceans are the shared home of all humanity. Only by following the principle of consultation, cooperation, and shared benefits, and by promoting the establishment of a more just and reasonable global ocean governance system, can we truly realize the beautiful vision of maritime peace and security and a thriving maritime economy. All countries should support the UN in playing a central role and continue to advance the process of international lawmaking and rulemaking, and actively address emerging challenges, including marine ecological conservation and sea level rising. Upholding the principles of openness, inclusiveness, and win-win cooperation, we need to further boost maritime connectivity and infrastructure development and promote the sustainable and rational use of marine resources. President, as always, China, being a staunch defender and contributor for the international maritime law, has taken concrete actions to uphold the authority and integrity of the UNCLOS, and was among the first to sign and ratify the Convention on Biological Diversity. China has been playing an active role in such areas as safety of maritime navigation, disaster reduction and prevention, and ecological conservation. China has dispatched 48 naval escort task forces to the Gulf of Aden and Somali waters to carry out routine escort missions. China is also an active participant in the UN's Ocean Decade Initiative. China has issued the Belt and Road Blue Cooperation Initiative and actively supports developing countries and small island developing countries in attaining the SDGs, while providing high-quality global maritime public goods to the international community. Together with the international community, we will continue our unremitting efforts to safeguard common maritime security and build a maritime community with a shared future. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Your Excellency, Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Sayani, Minister for Foreign Affairs, thank you for your presence today. And I would also like to thank the Presidency of Bahrain for convening this meeting on maritime security, an issue of critical importance for international peace and security. I also wish to thank the UN Secretary General and the IMO Secretary General and Mr. Nick Childs for their insightful and comprehensive briefings. Mr. President, the high-level open debate takes place at a moment of escalating concern. Threats to maritime security are multiplying, while attacks on international shipping are growing not only more frequent, but more sophisticated and disruptive in their impact. Global shipping faces sharper, evolving, more complex threats than ever. Piracy, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, smuggling, and hybrid attacks targeting vessels and critical maritime infrastructure. The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz underscored the fundamental importance of securing open, safe, and unimpeded passage. Unjustified attacks on merchant vessels are clear violation of international law with far-reaching and destabilizing consequences for all. They disrupt global supply chains, threaten food and energy security, and carry profound consequences for the economic resilience for all our countries. They put seafarers directly in harm's way and lay bare the vulnerability of the system on which the global economy depends. Let us be clear. When maritime security is compromised, international peace and security is at risk. Mr. President, Greece is a leading maritime nation with a rich seafaring history and the largest merchant maritime fleet. Greek shipping accounts for over 20% of the global and 61% of the European Union fleet. As an elected member of the Security Council, Greece is firmly committed to safeguarding maritime security, ensuring that international maritime routes stay open, secure, resilient under all circumstances. Freedom of navigation is not only a long-standing principle of international law, it is the backbone of global stability. It must be upheld in full conformity with international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which sets out the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. Its provisions reflect customary international law. In this context, the message is straightforward. Transit should be safeguarded and should not be restricted or obstructed. To this end, Greece contributes actively to collective efforts to enhance maritime security. We participate in EU Operation Atalanta and the EU Operation Irini, and we play a leading role in the EU Operation Aspides in the Red Sea region. Mr. President, no single actor can meet these challenges alone. Effective responses require strengthened international cooperation, coordination and information sharing, building on existing initiatives by states and international organizations. The International Maritime Organization remains central to these efforts. We welcome the outcome of its extraordinary session of the 18th of March on the impact of recent developments on shipping and seafarers, and we join its call for an immediate end to attacks affecting innocent seafarers. We also welcome the recent conference convened by France and the UK in Paris and the efforts to strengthen international cooperation to protect freedom of navigation and enhance protection of maritime waterways. Looking ahead, there is scope to further strengthen maritime domain awareness and information sharing at the global level. In this regard, Greece sees merit in exploring more structured and system-wide approaches within the United Nations, building on existing efforts to enhance coordination and support member states in addressing maritime security threats. Emerging and new technologies, including artificial intelligence, can serve as force multipliers, provided that they are deployed in full respect of international law. These technologies enhance monitoring, improve information sharing, and facilitate operational coordination. We stand ready to actively contribute to discussions and help chart a path towards developing collectively effective mechanisms to ensure that emerging technologies reinforce international peace, security, and human dignity. In conclusion, Mr. President, maritime security is not a peripheral issue. It is a core component of international peace and security. The Security Council cannot remain indifferent to developments that directly affect international peace and security, global trade, energy security, and economic stability, which have far-reaching repercussions for humanity as a whole. Greece remains committed to working with all partners to ensure that the seas remain open, secure, and governed by rules. Respect for international law is not optional, it is indispensable. I thank you.